Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View.
Parenting adolescence, but whether you have a teenager, and certainly you want to get a copy of this book, or you're going to have a teenager and you want to get a copy of this book, perhaps you're a pastor, a youth leader, I can't even imagine you wouldn't want to have access to some of the things we're going to talk about today, and I think you're really going to enjoy the conversation we're going to have with the author of this new book, Feeding the Mouth That Bites You. That tells you immediately. It is written by Dr. Ken Wilgus. He's in studio with me today, a licensed psychologist who specializes in the treatment of adolescents. He is an individual that maybe some of you remember hearing on the Minrith Meyer Clinic many years ago. That goes back a few years, of course. Individual that graduated from Baylor University, also has a master's degree in school psychology from Trinity University, as well as a PhD in counseling psychology from the University of Texas at Austin. Also co-founder of Ringleaders, which is a men's ministry focusing on strengthening the role of husbands in Christian marriage. We sit on boards together. We've been good friends. Even one of my children actually did some counseling with you. So it is just a delight to have you in studio today.
Thanks. It's great to be here. Thank you, Kirby.
I guess we do sound a little bit older. Some of our listeners that are younger say, Minrith Meyer Clinic, never heard of that radio show.
That was quite a while ago. Yes, it was.
But again, it is great to have as illustrated by the title. And I thought just let's get into it, and then, of course, we'll open up the phones if some people want to ask some questions. But when we talk about adolescence, this is a modern phenomenon. You talk about the modern kind of problem. Puberty has dropped dramatically over the last century. And so as before, it's kind of like just about the time you're going to be a man or a woman, you were going to get married. And there wasn't the teen minute.
And they told me that adolescence, as we understand it, is about 100 years old. The word teenager is like started after 1941. And I remember being stunned by that. Like, yes. It's like studying to be an ear, nose, and throat doctor, and they're going, you know, we didn't have noses until like last 100 years. Like, that can't be right. It's harder to just go out and be on your own after 13 or 14. There was this needed period to kind of train and be ready. Well, that extended for a while, and then probably after World War II, it got snapped onto the end of childhood. And after that, you have these 13 to 18 or even older kids that are still kind of looked at as kind of big children. And we've had a problem with it ever since.
Well, when we talk about extended adolescence, you talk about in the book here, failure to launch. And so that's another issue that we'll get into today probably as well. But one illustration you used in the book I thought was very good. And that is if you look at yearbooks from maybe a few generations before, the kids look like kids and they're not trying to look like adults. And the adults look like adults and they don't look like they're trying to look like kids. And so not so long ago, there was a pretty clear line of demarcation that doesn't really exist now.
That's really true. And the funny thing is when you look at those 1930, 1940 yearbooks, as I mentioned, look at the teachers and look at the way they're dressed, the way they're looking. Those are called grown-ups. These are not older people trying to look young or trying to be kind of hip. They're grown-ups. And you have, like you mentioned, these teenagers that essentially are kind of trying to work their way toward grown-up land. And that seems like a weird thing now. If you get a chance, people should find your grandparents or your parents' yearbook and look at those teachers, and you just think, what was so different then than they are now? And it's very different.
Talking with Dr. Ken Wilgus, and again, the book is entitled Feeding the Mouth That Bites You. First of all, I might mention that we have a link to his website, which I think you're going to find very helpful. Place for you to order the book, and I know you're also doing an audiobook that goes with that as well. So a lot of people, if they want to read or hear, get some real information about that. And early on in the book, you talk about trying to make sense of the adolescent behavior. Because some of us are convinced that there are aliens, and that is at the age of 13, this alien comes in and takes one brain out of my child and puts a different brain in, and all of a sudden, almost instantaneously, there are all sorts of hormones and words and comments and reactions that I haven't seen before in my child.
That is exactly right. And for some parents, it almost seems like literally overnight. It's not always that way, but it can come on quickly. And depending upon how you understand it, some people almost describe it like there's this hormone craziness that comes about. Mm-hmm. Well, there's no question that some of the physical changes create very labile emotions and so forth, but it still gets down to the bigger question of, well, how come all cultures don't have the same issues? Mm-hmm. And how come we didn't used to have these same issues? So no one's questioning that there's still good things we're learning from developmental stuff about brains, and but when you understand teenage behavior, the clear thing that you want to kind of keep in mind throughout this whole thing is what we call that drive toward individuation. A teenager changes physically, all these things that basically signal, I'm going to be a grown-up pretty soon, an adult. How will I know that I've gotten there? And when you understand that as the biggest kind of underlying motivation and why they talk the way they do, why they do the things they do, it kind of clears up a whole lot of what it can otherwise seem like weird behavior.
And that's one of the problems where we don't have a demarcation, that individuation is something that happens over time. And religiously, we've had things like a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah. You've had a rite of passage.
Right.
But there's really nothing there, maybe for some kids turning 16 and getting a driver's license or something. These are my... The adolescence is saying, wait a minute, I'm going to be an adult someday, and I'd kind of like to have control over some parts of my life more and more every year. And that's where a lot of the conflict develops.
It really is. And especially the big difference that kind of controls the way that happens is fear.
Yes.
Parents that are fearful of what they see in this teenager's life, his or her desire to be on their own, can seem scary, especially in the world that we live in. And you can end up almost like doing the wrong thing when your car goes into a skid. You steer the wrong way. And parents, too often that I see, especially in close families, have a bad habit of steering toward more control,
yes,
which pushes this teenager away. Just let go of everything. Find a kind of a sensible path in negotiating this kind of need that the adolescent has, and the need still for parents to kind of exercise a certain amount of control and kind of bring some sanity to the whole thing.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, you might, if you're taking some notes, put down the words planned emancipation, because that's something we're going to talk about. But we're also going to get into a lot of the hot topics. I got to love Dr. Ken Wilgus, because we have sections in here on school and alcohol and drugs, video games, dating, and sex. You're about as controversial as I am, so we'll see what we get ourselves into today. Fascinating book, so well written, Feeding the Mouth That Bites You. Dr. Ken Wilgus is with us in studio. You can watch the program or listen to it, and this may be one of those programs where you're going to want to download the podcast and listen to it again, or maybe pass it on to others that would like to know a little bit more. Need to take a break, and so we will do so. But when we come back, we're going to talk about this idea of planned emancipation and really how to parent adolescents. I think you're going to find it fascinating. We'll talk with Dr. Ken Wilgus right after this.
With Kirby Anderson.
I recently had former Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz on my radio program to talk about his new book, The Case Against the Iran Deal. How can we now stop Iran from getting nukes? Although he has been a supporter of Iran. We talked about the threat a nuclear-armed Iran would be to. We both questioned whether this deal was really a treaty. If this Iran deal is a treaty, then it would need 2/3 of the U.S. Senate to ratify it. Some big questions surface concerning sanctions and inspections. Arizona Senator Jeff Flake says that even though Congress has received assurances from the administration that it does not forfeit its ability to impose sanctions, he has found that these assurances do not square with the text of the Iran agreement. He believes the deal gives Iran lots of leverage that it currently does not have. Some are critical of the administration's willingness to abandon anytime, anywhere inspections. They are even more concerned that no Americans will be allowed on the inspection teams and that other inspectors will have to be vetted by Iranian intelligence. Texas Senator John Cornyn has been critical of the secret side deals. He says trusting Iran to inspect its own nuclear site is remarkably naive and incredibly reckless. Representative Ed Royce, chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, called the Iran agreement a dangerous farce. Democrat New Jersey Senator Robert Menendez says that lifting the arms and missile embargo well before Iranian compliance actually leaves us in a weak position. He believes that the Iran deal is based upon hope, and he says hope is part of human nature, but unfortunately is not a national security strategy. In short, the Iran deal is not a good deal for Israel or America, and many members of Congress are willing to say so. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Prayer is a powerful weapon. From Provident Films and Affirm Films comes War Room, now playing rated PG. More information at warroomthemovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Very privileged to have in studio with us today Dr. Ken Wilgus, and his book is entitled Feeding the Mouth That Bites You, a complete guide to parenting adolescents and launching them into the world. You're going to be hearing a lot more about the book, but I think this is one of the first interviews, and since we're good friends, I'm glad to have you in studio here today. If you have a teenager, or you're going to have a teenager, or you know people that do, or you're in youth ministry, this is a book you really need to have on your shelves. It's really one you need to read because it really helps you understand some of the conflicts that surface as we deal with our teenagers. Well, a whole section of your book is understanding planned emancipation. So let's, if we can, kind of get into that. What do you mean?
Well, it's essentially the technique of taking the need that a teenager has, which is to know, when will I be autonomous? They want to know from their parent, when will the people that know me say that it's time for me to handle things myself? Well, that's a natural need that teenagers have always had.
Of course.
And yet the funny thing is, now that we're 100 years into this, parents that are parenting that, they didn't hear that really clearly from their parents, and their grandparents didn't really do that either. So the actual message is to be able to, instead of waiting for your teenager to sort of magically show you adult behavior, whether that's she can support herself or he shows that kind of judgment, whatever you're looking for, it kind of turns it the other way around and says, we will tell you when and in regular order when you will be ready to handle things yourself. So planned emancipation is essentially like taking territories of what is otherwise a teenager, like its own sovereign nation. There's a map in there that you think of your teenager as a sovereign nation divided by these states, the territories like your room, choice of friends, choice of clothes, different things that you have to exercise your own judgment about. And planned emancipation is all about essentially actively and with good communication explaining, we're pulling out of here. It's not that I'm going to be real nice and let you listen to music that I don't think is good. It's really giving the message that at your age, It's now time for you to make your own decision about this thing, which again is like oxygen for a teenager. The fun part is when you first start initiating planned emancipation, that's when the fun stories get. Parents come back going, well, we read out the list of things that we no longer will be telling her how to handle it. And she looked at us and said, is this a joke? Is this, and, when surly teenagers are stunned, it's real fun.
Yeah.
So, it's an orderly means of keeping letting go of the things that you can early while still controlling, as you need to, the more dangerous and critical issues till later in adolescence.
Yes. Again, one of the things I like about this book is you have some charts, but you also have that map idea, and I love that, the sovereign nature of your teenager. And imagine in your mind's eye right now, maybe the island of UK or an island in the Caribbean, and then you got one part that has friends, one says music, one closed school, curfew, room, whatever it might be. And then what you have is another diagram where the parents are crossing it all off, and as a result, you begin to realize that's what it is, that you can't just throw them out in the world instantaneously, but you can create what you kind of call a freedoms list, right?
Exactly.
Explain that. If you might.
A freedoms list, again, is often includes things that parents really don't have control over anyway.
Right.
In that map, for example, teenagers feel like, whether it's right or not, that you're occupying troops in my territory. So their question is not, for example, why do you make me clean my room? The question really is, why do you still think it's time for you to tell me how to keep my room clean? Well, there's some good reasons to still influence a kid in some of the things that they're involved in, but you want to think about, especially first, some of the areas that you don't really have control over anyway. So a freedoms list is where you actually start to lay out some areas that we are saying we want you from now on to use your own judgment when it comes to blank. Mm-hmm. So you take actually one that's changed over the last 20 years. There are many parents that, for good reason, really want to influence their teenager about what music they listen to. Well, that's a good thing. The question is, what's the best way to influence a teenager? If you followed electronics and you're not Amish, then you really probably realize that even at early stages of adolescence, parents no longer really have control over that. Even not that long ago, you and I are not as young as we used to be, you could actually take a CD and take it from the kid, and that would mean something. Well, I hope everyone knows now that if there's any electronic device in your house, you can't really keep them from downloading, streaming. They will hear music. That's an example of something that by giving them the knowledge that, look, we no longer say you have to answer to us about what music you listen to, you actually open up a venue of communication. We'll talk about that in a minute, which is real important. But the point is, you're not really giving up something you have much control over anyway.
And really, in one of your charts, you have freedoms on one side and then boundaries on the other. So let's say, freedom to have your own judgment in keeping your room clean, but the boundaries are you have to do your own laundry, maybe at a certain age, or no food in your room, or no odors beyond your room. You talk about the word smell occasionally in here.
Yes.
I got the sense that is an issue that when you counsel some of these
Been
adolescents.
doing this a long time, Kirby.
Yes.
Yes, all kinds of things come up. Odor, laundry,
Yes.
How do you handle when they've left their laundry in the washer? The funny thing is that the room is actually one of my favorites. One of the early things, if your teenager actually has their own room, again, you're looking for ways to actually give over that freedom, but it also scares mothers particularly. I've had mothers bring in photos of rooms and say, you mean this room to let go of? But in 30 years, I've not had any teenagers have not died of a dirty room. But the boundaries are always there. With freedom comes responsibility.
Sure.
You don't want us coming in there, picking up your clothes. So that's the washer, that's the dryer. You'll be doing that yourself. If you can afford an exterminator, you can keep food in your room. But if you can't, your room is attached to my house, so I'll find you $1 for a plate.
We'll call the EPA or whatever it takes.
And the funny thing is, teenagers do respect a little more. Hey, if my behavior is bugging the rest of the family, that's easier to swallow than we're trying to teach you that cleanliness is next to godliness. You've taught them that for 13 years, but after that point, you have to rethink, can we let go of stuff so they can experience their own judgment or lack of judgment in that area?
So again, freedom, but boundaries, but
Always.
then consequences, right?
Yes.
So how do we think that through a little
Well,
bit?
in some of with the freedoms, the boundaries that you talk about tend to be things that are more so that your bad judgment won't affect us. The rest of the family. And where it does, then sometimes you have to be creative about the kind of consequences that go along with that, so that instead of experiencing the full bad choice, you can put some minimum kind of consequence in there so that they still feel the sort of the consequence of their own bad choices.
Yes. So again, part of that gets back to implementation, and we're not talking about putting gold stars on a chart on the refrigerator. So talk about that's not working out. We know that.
The funny thing is, people will pull that back out and wonder why is that not working?
Why is that not working for my 14-year-old?
The funny, they don't really respond to that. Ironically, with feeding the mouth that bites you end up with two lists. There's the freedoms list, which goes first, which is important in giving the message that we are behind your growing up. In close families, Kirby, one of the most common mistakes is giving the message that in this house you don't grow up, you just have to get away. And that's not a message we can afford when we want to really have influence over teenagers. The second list, however, is an expectations and consequence list, which is the real list of, look, while you're still here, there are some things that you still have to do. We know you don't like it, but for example, you have to come in at such and such time.
Right.
And with that, you got to put on the other side of that page, and if you don't, this is what we'll do. Because if you don't put a consequence in there, you might as well write, we'll get real mad and start yelling at you, because that's pretty much what happens. So it's actually kind, if you will, to think through, what can I do, what can I take away from my teenager for about 24 hours or more that will cause them to suffer? Take away a phone, take away access to computer, take away a car, such that it's a reasonable consequence for breaking our expectations. There still needs to be some list of that. It's the freedoms list that usually makes parents nervous and, in fact, is what kicks off the whole process, so that yesterday's expectations become tomorrow's freedoms. And again, the message comes to our teenagers, in this house I'm growing up. They are seeing me more and more as an adult. And that is a great resilience to a lot of other temptations.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Just lots of common sense from this book because of decades of experience that Dr. Ken Wilkes has had as a licensed psychologist who specializes in the treatment of adolescents. If you go to our website, pointofview.net, you will see a link to drwilkes.com, or you can simply go there instantaneously, but we've made it very easy for you to find out more about him and about the book, and a place you can order it there. Of course, we also have a picture of the book where you can order it, and we just figure that you probably will sometime in the future see it in your bookstore, but if you want to get it, we've made it very easy for you to do. And as I've said, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212, and we'll get into communication, because that is another part of that. You set some limits and certainly talked about this idea of beginning to move the teenager through planned emancipation. But okay, what about the communication and how that begins to develop? Then we'll try to get into one or two of those controversial issues. Lots to cover, more than we can possibly do in an hour, but we did want you to know about this new book, Feeding the Mouth That Bites You. Dr. Ken Wilkes with us in studio. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Provident Films and Affirm Films comes War Room. Tony and Elizabeth Jordan's marriage is turning into a battle, and their daughter is caught in the crossfire until Elizabeth meets Miss Clara.
This is my favorite place in this house. I call it my war room.
And learns that prayer is a powerful weapon. War Room. Now playing. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. More information is available at warroomthemovie.com.
Have you ever wanted to walk where Jesus walked? To stand in places where the Apostle Paul proclaimed the gospel and saw the world and people's lives changed? In May of 2016, you can do just that on a 15-day tour of Israel and Greece with Point of View's very own Kirby Anderson. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to experience the Bible and history in places God chose to begin the spread of his message of grace. Join Kirby and Point of View for Journey to Jerusalem and Journeys of Paul. Learn more by clicking on the banner at pointofview.net. You've read the Bible, here's a chance to live it. pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today in studio with us, Dr. Ken Wilgus, and he is the author of Feeding the Mouth That Bites You, a complete guide to parenting adolescents and launching them into the world. We've talked about a number of issues. I know this is probably one of those programs where you probably want to just sit back and listen, but if any of you have any questions, we'll try to give you that opportunity. 1-800-351-1212. But Ken, just a few minutes ago, we talked about communication. Okay, we've talked about this idea of planned emancipation. We've talked about boundaries and freedoms and those kinds of things. Communication, very important.
Yeah, more important than limit setting is communication. And if there's some value in pulling out control where you can, is that it increases and always does increase your ability to influence through communication. And too often parents almost take as a given that my teenager doesn't want to talk to me, they're surly, and they don't really make efforts to change that or assume that they can do anything about that. The truth is that teenagers actually do want to communicate with their parents. They're not very good at it, and they give up very easily, but they do want to. So it's worthwhile for parents to look at why is my teenager not talking to me more, and making efforts to talk to them, to seek that kind of communication. One of the most common ones, like we've already talked about, is a control battle. You can't make a teenager talk to you. And teenagers know that, and so they often exert their need for control by kind of refusing to talk to you.
Yep.
By giving over that kind of, making sure they know that I'm not a cop. When I say, how was your day at school? I don't mean I need to check what happened to let you know if there's a teacher I need to call, and I'm just asking because I want to know. And teenagers actually kind of can open up more when they understand that, so you actually are just wanting to know and you're not trying to control that. And there's many other things like, I have concerns about your friend, but listen, I'm not trying to tell you who you can be friends with. I just want to know, and so forth. And you end up with a lot more influence through communicating once you kind of reduce, very often, a control battle.
You have a illustration, and I love your illustrations, about knocking off the ends of the bitter pill. Explain that for just a minute, and then I might want to take at least one phone call.
That's about advice giving, which is an underused influence. Parents are often, what they're telling their teenagers is not actually something they're making them do. They just want to give some good advice, but they haven't defined, listen, what I'm about to tell you is only advice, not a have to. And they can never imagine that their teenager is incredibly touchy about this. So the way to do that is to actually think of it as a very big pill. I'm just not sure that she's a good friend for you. But knock off the front and the back end of it, starting by owning it. Listen, this is just me, and maybe I'm nutty, but I just worry that she's not treating you with the respect that she wants to. And that's the middle part of the pill, small enough she can swallow it. And then at the end, you chop off the back end by going, but listen, you probably want to ignore what I just told you, because that's just me. That actually makes it easier for a teenager to listen if you make it smaller. Yes. Rather than the opposite, which is, I've been around for a few years and you need to, and they actually just, their ears go deaf.
Yep, that's it. They're not even going to react to that at all. Along the way, I'd like to take a phone call or two, so let's head out to California first, KYCC. Kevin, thank you for calling today. You're on with Ken Wilgus.
Hi, yeah. One thing, I haven't had an opportunity to listen to the full length of the discussion, but what is defined by teenager, by age? I see a lot of what I would call delayed adolescence these days.
Yes, I was going to get into that, and you raised that issue because you talk about failure to launch in the book.
That's right.
Ken Wilgus, and also this idea of delayed adolescence and all sorts of other issues. So,
yeah, Kevin's got a great question. Like, how do we know when adolescence starts? Well, again, most of us are used to a kind of an odd system that's been going on for 100 years where we are watching our teenager and asking or expecting them to show us when adolescence has started, when for time immemorial before that, we told them. And it's essentially, for all, pretty much history has always known that after about 12 years old, by 13 or so, childhood is done and adolescence begins, or young adulthood begins. I like to think of adolescents as adults in training. It's not that they're old children, but they are young, very poor. Yeah, pretty much everything they own belongs to their parents. Everything. That includes the iPod that grandmom gave me. No, that would belong to your parents. I love telling a 15-year-old that'll sit there and go, well, they can't take my computer. I'm like, well, actually, dude, let me tell you that if your dad takes it from you, who are you going to call? Like the cops are going to go, well, who took your, hello? Like they're not going to listen to you. So they're impoverished young adults. They're inexperienced young adults, but it is still worthwhile to think about them pretty much from 13 on, to your question, Kevin, as adults in training, adolescents.
What about this extension? You talk a little bit about failure to launch, because you mentioned this in the book, and it's not necessarily the focus of the book, but we see kids that are in their 20s, sometimes in their 30s, still living at home because of all sorts of reasons. School debt is one of those, but also emotional issues. There have been whole films about that as well.
That's right. And, that's what we do in America. If we can't figure something out, we make a movie about it. And, I've had parents that will tell me, I fear, what if my kid is that one that doesn't launch?
Yes.
And I tell them, well, here's the good news. That's actually up to you. Yeah. You launch them by signaling them that, and for most everyone listening, it's the end of high school is pretty much when adolescence needs to be over and your young adult needs to be ready to live on their own. After that, things change. For example, and most of us that are my age know this, but it's harder to imagine now. A young adult that's finished with high school is not actually welcome to live in their parents' house for the rest of their life. I know in my house, I had a great relationship with my parents. I would never think about, why don't I just kind of hang out with no job for a couple of years? I'm pretty sure my dad wouldn't go for that. So we launched because we were kind of pushed in an appropriate way. But I would also argue that being can live here if you're going to school full-time, working full-time, going to school half-time, working half-time, but outside of something like that, you're really not welcome here. That's a really bad signal if your child were 8. But for an 18, 19-year-old, I would argue it's respectful that says, listen, you don't actually need to be here. You can take care of this. So we're happy to have you here under these circumstances.
Yes.
There is a way of being loving, nurturing, but it's actually disrespectful. It almost implies, we know that you can't handle this yourself.
That kind of relates to one of the other topics in the book, setting limits, because it seems to me once you establish what the limits are, what the boundaries are, a lot of those issues take care of themselves, don't they?
They do, and the funny part is that when you do, you end up with an expectations and consequences list that is usually pretty small. And once you get down to letting go of the things that you really want them to have that freedom and know that you respect their freedom, there's still some things that you hang on to, but on those things, that list gets smaller as they get older, until finally there's a point when you need to say, listen, it's now up to you even when you come in at night. But prior to that, if you set a limit, you need to put a consequence to it that counts. This is where parents sometimes think I go from kind of bleeding heart to, gee, you're a little rough there. But, I mean, if the curfew is at midnight, that means 12:01, something needs to happen. Doesn't need to be huge, like an hour off the next weekend night, but if you're going to set an expectation, you really need to have a real consequence for it.
That's right. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Dr. Kenneth Wilka with us today as we talk about his book, Feeding the Mouth That Bites You. And just before we take a break, we mentioned movies, and I got to bring this up. I've seen the movie Inside and Out, but you liked it too. And I would say that some people that want to understand some of these swirling hormones and things like that, even though the story is about a youngster, between the comedy and the cartoonishness, but also the real accurate illustration of some of the emotions, you really enjoyed that movie.
Well, I don't
you?
know any shrink that doesn't enjoy a movie that's going to talk about feelings, and I mean, we love that stuff. Yeah. But the thing I liked about it was that, except for the fact that thought was seen as this train of thought that would like go away, kind of seems like we don't think much. But the thing I liked was the very end of the movie, besides the scene where the boy bumps into the girl and just goes crazy. Did you see that part? That is just hilarious.
Yeah, can't get his words out.
As a matter of fact, my daughter-in-law was in a movie theater watching the movie, sitting next to an 11-year-old boy who yelled out, "That's exactly how I feel!" But my favorite is that at the very end of the movie, if you may remember, I think the last line is, everything's basically going to be okay now because she's 12. What could possibly go wrong? And I think that's where Feeding the Mouth That Bites You pops in exactly at that point, where there's going to be some things that change because adolescence, basically childhood is about to be over, and adolescence is going to kick in.
Let's do a movie on feeding the mouth that bites you. That'd be a very, very good one. We need to take a break. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We've covered a lot of the book, but there are some other thoughts. There's some special topics on drugs, alcohol, dating, sex. We'll try to pick off one or two of those. And again, let me commend the book to you. Over 200 pages, and it is one that I think will give you a lot of great illustrations, some very practical things, a couple of charts to fill out, very practical material that comes from basically decades of common sense that comes from counseling, and we are privileged to have in studio for just a few more minutes Dr. Ken Wilgus, and he is a licensed psychologist, deals with treatment of adolescents, and is the author of this complete guide to parenting adolescents and launching them into the world. This is probably the first you've heard about it because the book's just coming out, so if you would like to order it, we've got some links for you to find them on our website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Dr. Ken Wilgus in studio with us today as we talk about his book, Feeding the Mouth That Bites You, a complete guide to parenting adolescents and launching them into the world. Second hour today, I'll have an open line, so if some of you did not have a chance to ask a question, we'll certainly give you that opportunity as we get into some other topics as well, but did want to give you a chance to hear a little bit on some of these real controversial issues, and you have a whole third section on special topics, things like school and alcohol and drugs, video games, dating and sex, adolescents' faith. Let's pick off maybe two, drugs and alcohol. What about that? How do we think through that issue?
It's a very important issue because things, a lot of times parents will talk about, well, when I was in high school, we, this, that, and whatever. Things have really changed. The potential downside for even a moderate amount of alcohol use, teenagers never use a moderate amount, and even the drug use now is much more dangerous than it used to be. So ironically, you really want to be very proactive about that. Well, one of the main ways to do that is if you look at some of the research about why do teenagers drink. One of the more common motivations is teenagers drink to feel grown up. Well, that's all the more reason to think about planned emancipation and giving, where you appropriately can, the message to your teenager, listen, we see you growing up. You can handle some stuff yourself. Because for a lot of other reasons, but this is an important one, it helps teenagers to be kind of resilient against temptation to be a part of what feels grown up. Just because you can pour some alcoholic beverage down your throat is hardly a real grown up behavior, but it's a big motivator. So it helps to show them, let them grow up at home so that they have less temptation. But when you do get involved, when you do have evidence of involvement with alcohol, we definitely talk about in the book, that's where your expectations and consequences need to be very clear about what will happen if there's a first time, but definitely what will happen if there's a second time and what we will do about it. Teenagers need to be very clear on what their parents will allow and not allow when it comes to drugs and alcohol.
And again, you have some kind of comments that they might make and even some possible responses. And sometimes I'm thinking, oh, I wish I had thought that through. There's a better answer that you give than the one that I thought of at the moment. So one of those is drugs and alcohol. We want to talk about faith, but one of our callers wants to get into that issue. So let's just take that phone call. KCTA in Texas. Roseanne, thank you for joining us today. You're on with Dr. Ken Wilgus.
I just thank you for the show. I wanted to ask you if you had any advice on how to encourage the kids to keep the faith after they've outgrown our influence.
Sure, and that's exactly where I was going to go next, and I wanted you to set up the conversation.
That's exactly the question that needs to be asked. As you may have read, depending upon the study you look at, 60 to 80% of very church-involved teenagers pretty much abandon the faith for some period of 3 to 5 years. There's a very high percentage that just don't follow through after they've left home. And those are startling statistics. I think, again, based on what we've been talking about and what you can understand from the book, again, that's another thing that makes sense as to basically, have you given your teenager the message that your faith is between you and God? The things I'm trying to tell you are advice. I want to try to tell you, for example, teenagers do not respond well to a lot more teaching from their parents about what God wants from them and so forth, but they do respond a lot more if you talk about your faith. Adult to adult, listen, you probably don't want to hear me ask you if you prayed today, but do you mind if I just mention something that happened to me yesterday when I was praying? That's a very different message. And you do need to, and this is the scary part, at some point before your teenager leaves your house, you actually do want to say to them, at this point, you make your own decision about whether you want to go to church. I think a lot of parents wait for that till, say, the spring of senior year in high school. As scary as that sounds, some parents may even think, well, that's not following through with my responsibility. Again, I would remind you this is responsibility with a young adult, not an 8-year-old, that at some point you want to let them know the message that I wish I could drag you to the throne of grace myself, but I can't. And ultimately, this is between you and God, so that you have some period of time where they can exercise how they really feel about the faith, and you can hopefully, if you've been doing the planned emancipation, come alongside and really communicate about the faith, because that's really what makes the difference, is parents who can communicate influence young adults, much stronger influence, and it keeps them in the faith after they've left home.
Rosanna might just mention chapter 12 in the book is something that would certainly give some direction, but as I look at the clock, we only have a few minutes, and you have a section here about, let's talk about you, parent issues. Up until now, we've been talking about, okay, what do I do, because my kids have a bad attitude, but sometimes parents are causing some of the difficulty as well, aren't they?
Yeah, they really do, and I almost hesitated to write that part, because, you hate to, I have so many parents that are striving so hard, they want to do this right, and you don't want to add any other thing to, well, maybe you should look at this. But there's there's a couple of core issues that I think are key. One is your marriage. If you're not a single parent, in your marriage, it's common to almost think, let's just set aside some of the strains we're having now, and we'll work on that after the kids are gone. That is a mistake on many levels. One of the big ones is that teenagers are all eyes and ears. They know when parents are not getting along. They tell me, they don't necessarily tell you. And it's very difficult for us to try to communicate faith, love, core values of marriage when we're only pretending we really are not getting along together. So it's critical for that reason. And secondly, if you're going to have influence with your teenagers, you need to make sure you're backing each other up. And parents find themselves on different sides of issues, like, should we allow this? Is this okay? And you have to learn in your marriage to work out our differences. And that's done not by going to an expert per se, but it's done a big part by making sure that your relationship is good, that you're caring for each other. Better discussions for parents, instead of should we do this or not, is more what are you afraid of if we don't do this, and what are you afraid of if we do, and you find a way to care for each other in your marriage. So don't set your marriage aside. That's one of the big ones, that it's important to make sure you keep going as parents, that you keep taking the time for your own marriage.
And the fear factor that you talk about both at the beginning and the end here, just again, being willing to let loose a little bit and let them go in a way that certainly is honoring to the Lord. This book is just such a very helpful book, and I know that there are going to be a lot of parents of teenagers or preteens that are going to want to get the book. As a matter of fact, everybody I've shown this book to says, where was this when I was raising my kids? But it does occur to me that this is something that I think most pastors are going to want to have on their shelf if they're trying to understand that. If you're a youth pastor, I don't know how you could accomplish this without understanding some of these core issues. That would really give you some great insight. And I think maybe even a Bible study, a fellowship, Bible fellowship, if you have a bunch of parents of teenagers, you could say, maybe we could work through this chapter by chapter each week. So
I actually am going to Austin in a few weeks. There's a church there, Grace Covenant Church, that actually has a year-long curriculum that focuses on the feeding the mouth that bites you. There's also marriage. Churches are taking this on and taking it to heart. It's very encouraging.
I know you have the audio version coming out shortly. I know you're recording it right now. So again, Feeding the Mouth That Bites You, a complete guide to parenting adolescents and launching them into the world. You eventually probably will see it in your bookstore, but it's just out. So very hot off the press. So we wanted to get the first interview, and it's just a delight to have you in studio.
Thanks, Kirby. It's so great to be here. The guy that knows everything, knows everybody. He's got that voice. So fun.
Well, we need to have you back once again. So again, Dr. Kenneth Wilgus with us. The book is entitled Feeding the Mouth That Bites You. You will find all sorts of things. First, you can then go to his website. We all there to order it. And I might mention, as to listen to this again, so you can download the podcast and listen to it. You can download the livecast and watch it. You might want to send it to someone else. You might want to put it on your Facebook page to educate some other individuals. So there are just a lot of ways that we are equipping you so that you can make a real difference. And parenting these adolescents is a challenge, but there's an individual that will come alongside and try to do the best to help you out. That's all we have for this first hour, but I wanted to give you a chance to hear a little bit more about that. Feeding the Mouth That Bites You, a complete guide to parenting adolescents and launching them into the world. We'll take a break and come back with more right after these important messages.
The Point of View radio talk show is broadcast 2 hours each day, but you can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. There you'll also be among the first to see our new videos, Uncensored, a series highlighting issues impacting this generation and the next. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. @Point of View RTS. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Together, let's go viral. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
This hour, I want to spend some time talking about the killing of cops and certainly how that has become a national phenomenon. Now, again, as we get into this, let's recognize that if you look at the shootings of police officers, that is actually slightly down from last year. But if you look at the front page of USA Today, it says, "Fourth cop slain in 9 days." So obviously there is something going on, and I certainly want to address that issue. So that'll be one topic that we'll put on the table. Some people are beginning to ask the question if it's possible to even work as a county clerk if you're a Christian, because it gets back to the issue that is coming out of Kentucky right now. And it's just one example, but Kim Davis has been in the news because of her unwillingness to grant same-sex marriage licenses. And of course, we've talked about some of this issue before, so that is something that we will put on the table in terms of some of our conversation. There have been some pieces of evidence that suggest that this political campaign is changing a lot of people's minds. We're going to get into that a little bit later this hour if we have time. Of course, Donald Trump is number one, Ben Carson a close second, or even tied in some of the polls, than Marco Rubio, Jeb Bush, and Ted Cruz. But at the same time, we're also seeing Carly Fiorina, who looks like now she'll be in the main event rather than in the secondary one, because they at CNN have decided, I think wisely, to look at polls that have taken place since the first presidential debate for Fox News. And one of the articles I've posted here about whether or not some conservatives are discarding their principles because they support Donald Trump. So if those issues don't interest you, we have about a half a dozen others we could put on the table today, and we'll probably spend some more time tomorrow getting into those. But first up, this is of concern. Any of you that are in law enforcement, I'd love to hear from you, because right now you've got to begin to ask the question, are we being targeted? As somebody that grew up during the turbulent 1960s, I remember a time when there were some radicals that said, "Kill the pig." And that was a time in which it was somewhat dangerous, seemingly, because the respect for law enforcement had reached a very low ebb in the 1960s. There seems to be some evidence of that, again, in certain areas. I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but nevertheless, you can see some of these killings here illustrate this only so well. Let me read a little bit from USA Today, because I think it sets the scene. And that is, it says in this particular article, law enforcement continued a massive manhunt on Tuesday north of the city of Chicago, searching for 3 suspects in the shooting death of a veteran police officer who had been on patrol in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The killing marks the 4th incident in 9 days across the United States where law enforcement officers have been slain while going about their regular duties. The incident in the far north of the Chicago suburbs comes after the Harris County, Texas sheriff's deputy was gunned down Friday while fueling his patrol car. Police on Saturday arrested Shannon Miles, who said they shot 15 bullets into Deputy Darren Goforth, and the sheriff of Ron Hickman described the killing as a cold-blooded assassination. Then, of course, you have on August 26th, the police officer Harry Nelson was gunned down in Sunset, Louisiana. 2 days earlier, senior trooper Stephen Vincent of Louisiana State Police was shot in the head and then taunted after he stopped to provide aid to a man whose truck was stuck in a ditch. Police said a witness to the fatal shooting heard the suspect tell the trooper, "You're lucky, you're going to die soon." Despite the spate of recent killings, the number of law enforcement officers killed by gunfire while on duty this year is less than the same period in 2014, but less only by a few. And more importantly, I think we see a trend playing itself out right now. The number of killings I've seen in some of these communities, for example, is already equal to what it was in the entire year. So is there a mindset today that is actually part of this? And one of those issues is that even as the mainstream media, ABC, NBC, and CBS covered the story, this was a big story the other night, there was another story that would have paralleled with it very well. And what it was a march that took place in the upper Midwest in which Black Lives Matter actually had chants like kill the pig and roast him like a bacon and all the rest, put a pig in a blanket, and some of those phrases which actually came from that shooting that took place in New York City. That was not covered, although you have to wonder if some of the anger towards police officers has surfaced out of places like Ferguson, Missouri, and so many others. And so one of the questions certainly we want to put on the table today is, are we in a situation in which, number one, more and more people who are in law enforcement are going to fear for their lives because they already are in a very dangerous line of work, as we well know. When you come up to a car at night and you can't really see the hands of the driver, when you go into a house where there has been a domestic violence call, you don't know what you're walking yourself into sometimes. When you have a drug bust and you don't know if that's going to go wild, there are certainly enough dangers anyway. But then now when we see individuals actually targeting the police, what is the future there? And, of course, a secondary question, and I'd love to hear from some of you that work in law enforcement, have some of you begun to think about whether or not you want to stay in this line of work? Some of you that have been thinking about going to a police academy, are you beginning to rethink whether or not that is an honorable profession or whether that is a profession that you want to engage in light of the fact that you might be targeted by those individuals, and they can be individuals that come from an ethnic minority. They can be individuals that are terrorists or have terrorist intent. There are all sorts of possible threats that those who serve in law enforcement might face. And so one of the issues certainly I wanted to put on the table today is what is becoming a grave concern, and that is the possibility that more and more individuals who are in law enforcement might have to, even as they are gassing up their car, even as they are doing nothing more than trying to help an individual whose truck was stuck in a ditch, might be blindsided by somebody who intends to kill them. And so if you'd like to join our conversation, that is certainly one topic that I want to put on the table. Another one is certainly this very important question, and Terry Jeffrey asked this today: can a Christian be a county clerk in the United States? It's a question that is surfacing now because of the Rowan County clerk, Kim Davis, who has said that she just cannot actually, in good conscience, actually issue a same-sex marriage license. She's not the first, may be the last after this is actually adjudicated, but the whole question that is starting to surface is whether or not individuals that have certain kinds of convictions about certain issues, whether they can actually serve in government. Of course, you can add to that those who might be doctors, those who might be in some kind of ministry, whether or not we're going to see some very significant strictures and regulations and things brought down upon those who are those individuals holding to some kind of biblical perspective. So we're going to take a break, and if you'd like to join our conversation in this last half hour, I wanted to give you a chance and an open line to express your opinion. What about the killing of 4 police officers in 9 days? Is this a trend? What can we do to reverse it? And how can we reestablish respect for the law? We'll take your phone calls right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
I recently had former Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz on my radio program to talk about his new book, The Case Against the Iran Deal. How can we now stop Iran from getting nukes? Although he has been a supporter of the president, he isn't a supporter of the deal with Iran. We talked about the threat a nuclear-armed Iran would be to the region and especially to Israel. We both questioned whether this deal was really a treaty. If this Iran deal is a treaty, then it would need two-thirds of the U.S. Senate to ratify it. Some big questions surfaced concerning sanctions and inspections. Arizona Senator Jeff Flake says that even though Congress has received assurances from the administration that it does not forfeit its ability to impose sanctions, he has found that these assurances do not square with the text of the Iran agreement. He believes the deal gives Iran lots of leverage that it currently does not have. Some are critical of the administration's willingness to abandon anytime, anywhere inspections. They are even more concerned that no Americans will be allowed on the inspection teams and that other inspectors will have to be vetted by Iranian intelligence. Texas Senator John Cornyn has been critical of the secret side deals. He says trusting Iran to inspect its own nuclear site is remarkably naive and incredibly reckless. Representative Ed Royce, chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, called the Iran agreement a dangerous farce. Democrat New Jersey Senator Robert Menendez says that lifting the arms and missile embargo well before Iranian compliance actually leaves us in a weak position. He believes that the Iran deal is based upon hope, and he says hope is part of human nature, but unfortunately is not a national security strategy. In short, the Iran deal is not a good deal for Israel or America, and many members of Congress are willing to say so. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Prayer is a powerful weapon. From Provident Films and Affirm Films comes War Room, now playing rated PG. More information at warroomthemovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. One of the questions putting on the table here is the killing of 4 police officers slain in just the last 9 days. Is this a trend that will continue? What can we do to reestablish and reinforce the support for those who serve in law enforcement? Love to get your comments, 1-800-351-1212. Let's get to another story, though, and I mentioned it just before we took the break here, and this has to do with the Rowan County Clerk, Kim Davis, and is an individual that's working in Kentucky. She has invoked what she calls God's authority and denied marriage licenses. Terrence Jeffrey says this is going to be an issue because he says this is now a question of whether or not 5 Supreme Court justices can determine what you believe and what actions you take. And so he wonders whether a Christian can be a county clerk in the United States, but he also wonders if a Christian can be a doctor in the United States. He wonders if a nurse can be a public school teacher. And if you think that that's a vast expansion and extrapolation, just kind of think it through for just a minute here. Because he says in June, when 5 justices declared that the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment creates a right to same-sex marriage, he says Justice Clarence Thomas issued a warning. And I've not actually quoted from Justice Thomas on the air, so let me quote from that because it was a great comment, certainly from the justice. And he says, Clarence Thomas says, in our society, marriage is not simply a governmental institution, it is a religious institution as well. Today's decision might change the former, but it cannot change the latter. It appears that all but inevitable that the two will come into conflict, particularly as individuals and churches are confronted with demands to participate in and endorse civil marriages between same-sex couples. And basically, he talks about this being inevitable, and certainly it is, because as soon as we had this decision come down, then you had a situation which is now unfolding before everybody with cameras and spotlights and all the rest, and that is whether an individual county clerk could be forced to personally authorize a same-sex marriage in contradiction to her Christian faith. Now, the answer that comes from a lot of people is, if you can't do so, resign. But, of course, that's the bigger question that Terrence Jeffrey is asking. If indeed we're going to do that, are we going to suggest then that anybody that works in the public area will be forced to do something even if it violates the tenets of their faith? And in some respects, you could say, well, at least I would know what I was getting into before I got into that. For example, if you're a vegan, you're not going to apply to be a meat inspector. Does that make sense? Certainly, if you're a Muslim, you're not going to go into restaurants and be a health inspector to check out pork. I mean, you can start thinking about, on the front end, at least you know what you're getting yourself into and recognize there may be a problem with that particular profession or that particular position. Got it. But here, this was thrust upon an individual, in this case, Kim Davis, by the Supreme Court. Nobody saw that necessarily playing itself out as quickly as it did. And, of course, now you have this individual who has served as a deputy clerk for Rowan County for 26 years and now is going to possibly face a year in jail. And so, again, I think we have some issues that are certainly very important. And again, here is her statement, and I'll start taking some phone calls. A lot of them are going to be on the shooting of police officers. But she said, I never imagined a day like this would come where I'd be asked to violate a central teaching of Scripture and of Jesus himself regarding marriage. She goes on to say, to issue a marriage license which conflicts with God's definition of marriage with my name affixed to the certificate would violate my conscience. It's not a light issue for me. It's a heaven or hell decision. For me, it's a decision of obedience. I have no animosity towards anyone and harbor no ill will. To me, this has never been a gay or lesbian issue. It's about marriage in God's Word. It's a matter of religious liberty, which is protected under the First Amendment, the Kentucky Constitution, and the Kentucky Religious Freedom Restoration Act. So anyway, this is an issue that has become front page of USA Today, and it's certainly one of those issues that we'll be following and probably will spend some more time talking about on Friday, our weekend edition. Of course, we'll have Kelly Shackelford with us as well. Let's take some phone calls, and certainly one of the big issues that's on the table at the moment are the 4 different police officers that have been killed within the last 9 days. Let's, if we can, go first to Georgia and talk to Bessie. What would you like to say?
Well, this is Desi.
Busy. Oh, I'm sorry. Just yeah.
It's all good, brother. It is all good, brother. Like I was saying a minute ago, the killing of the police officers recently has been a direct result of police officers killing innocent African American males. I was offended when you guys was kind of setting up the call in, acting like it wasn't connected, that the two weren't connected, almost like, well, will this killing of police officers continue? My guess is it probably will if police officers continue to kill innocent African Americans. I'm retired military.
Which ones would you say were innocent? You know, I would love to get those on the table, first of all.
Well, it's just, you know what, and I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I hear about them. I'm not that much of an activist, whereas I'm walking or protesting or allowing it to really get me all angry. The number of attacks that I keep hearing about, and officers are overstepping their boundaries as police officers and peacekeepers, and the loss of African American lives are being the result of it.
You know, one of the things that I've talked about on this program before, and I don't know that you listen to every day, but we've had people like John Whitehead talking about the kind of the over-militarization of the police. And when I do programs like that, then I have people sending emails saying, you're not supporting the police officers. And then I told one that maybe is talking about the killing of the police, and then they were saying, well, you're not sensitive to the racial issues. But they're all equally true statements at the same time. We have the no-knock kinds of intrusions into people's houses without warrant. Sometimes you have abuse, which not just for black, but also other individuals that have suffered under the hands of a few police officers. And I suspect, again, these killings, again, are a few who actually feel that that is justifiable for why they're going to go out and to essentially assassinate these individuals. I mean, this is not happening because they're resisting arrest. I mean, these are individuals coming up to somebody who's pumping gas into their car. In one case in New York City, we're talking about they're actually sitting in their police car and somebody comes up and shoots them while they're sitting in the car. Obviously, we've kind of crossed a line here. And one doesn't justify the other, but they're a phenomenon that's playing out. But you got the last word, so you got it.
I completely understand, and let me say this in defense of the cops. A highly respectable profession when done properly. It's all about respect. America doesn't respect the word of God. One race doesn't respect another race, and it's showing out. But the thing is, I respect officers. Like I said, I'm retired military. I consider myself an educated black man, although just constantly I'm not up on current events like I should be. But I have been racially profiled over the years, and I could tell you some crazy stories of cops pulling me over simply because I was black. And there's so many stories like that that you don't hear about because it's not newsworthy. But when it gets to a point of we've been pulled over so much that now all of a sudden bullets are being fired at unarmed people when exorbitant amounts of police forces being used against those that are, like I said, unarmed. Like I said, it doesn't justify shooting cops, but it's definitely opening up America's eyes to a lot of the profiling and injustices perpetrated against African Americans in this country.
Well, first of all, let me say thank you for your service to this country, and I appreciate you taking the time to join us today here on Point of View and start the conversation off.
You're welcome, sir. God bless you.
Yeah, thank you for calling. We'll take some more calls, but we're getting up to a break, so I will give you that opportunity to call in. And we've got a couple of issues here. Some want to talk about the shooting of police officers. Some want to talk about the county clerk that I mentioned. There may be some others I'll get into in just a few minutes, but these are opportunities. Sometimes we have an open line to give you a national forum and to give other people a chance to interact with you and to hear a little bit more about where the mood of the country is. And of course, if we have time, if we don't get it to today, we'll certainly do some of that tomorrow or certainly by Friday, talking about some of the candidates, because this is an issue candidates are going to have to address as well. And so we want to hear from not only them and what they have to say, but also want to hear from you. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll come back and take a call on the county clerk there in Kentucky, front page news, but also, of course, the killing of 4 police officers in 9 days, front page news. And there are some other issues that aren't on the front page, which if I have time today or else tomorrow, I will cover because you need to know about them, and sometimes it's not covered at all by the mainstream media. That's what we try to do here at Point of View. Give you as much as possible so that you know a little bit more about how things affect your faith, your family, and your freedom. Let's take a break. We'll be back with more right after this.
You know, America is fast becoming a nation of perpetual children. One aspect of childhood is a relative lack of responsibility. Mom and dad are there to care for you, put food on the table, pay for clothes, your medical needs. Increasingly, people rely on government for these things, and throughout history, you'll find many regimes more than willing to play the role of daddy. But the cost is a loss of freedom. Daddy pays the bills, daddy makes the rules. Now, here's where you might stop nodding your head and get mad at me. You're listening to Point of View, which probably means it's helped you. Have you taken responsibility and supported what we do? Or are you leaving that to someone else? Large or small, make an investment in Point of View. Be one of the adults who stands with us. $20, $200, maybe $2,000. Pray about it and give. Call 1-800-227-1444. Click the donate button at pointofview.net or mail a gift to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Final half hour, give you a chance to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. Many of you that receive my commentary or listen to it on air know that today it was about the Iran deal. A lot of it was based upon the interview we did just recently with Harvard Law professor Alan Dershowitz on his book, The Case Against the Iran Deal. Well, just recently in the news, they announced that they may have the 34th vote, which then I think provides the opportunity for the United States Senate then to approve this particular deal by Barack Obama. You might say, well, I thought we needed 50 votes or 67 votes for 2/3. Well, it's the convoluted way that it goes about it. But the bottom line is that looks like this Iran deal we were talking about that's so bad probably will go forward, and we'll talk more about that later in the week. Most of you want to talk about the killing of police officers, but let me take one call that relates to another issue that's front page as well, and that is the issue of whether or not a Christian can be a clerk in America if indeed he or she disagrees with the ruling of 5 judges on this issue of same-sex marriage. So first of all, in Georgia, James, what would you like to say in that regard?
Thank you for taking my call. I would like, excuse me, God created Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve, not Sue and Lou. And I applaud the lady, the clerk in Kentucky. I applaud her because of her stand. And this is what's happening in America, especially in the Christian community. We, and in some cases, have not taken the stand that we need to take when it comes to principles and commandments of God. And as far as the administration, the leaders of this country, the president, the 5 Supreme Court justices who just made mockery out of the 14th Amendment, in my opinion, I think and I believe that she's right for her stand. I'm a pastor, and I will not perform a same-sex marriage. Why? Because it's not right, and it's not discrimination. The truth makes us free. The truth does not discriminate. And if we had the kind of leadership that we need in America, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But at the same time, Christians today, I believe, put Barack Hussein Obama in the Oval Office. And this country is in a big mess because of his substandard leadership. So the lady, the clerk in Kentucky, I applaud her. I applaud any individual who will take a stand. And that's what God calls us to do, take a stand. And I appreciate you taking my call. And one other thing concerning this deal with Iran, this is mockery. This is mockery. It's not a deal. It's not a deal at all, period. So I appreciate you taking my call.
Appreciate your call.
We need new leadership. We need new leadership in America. We need a new president and vice president of the United States of America. Thank you so much, sir.
Well, thank you, James. And again, we are talking about not just leadership in terms of the president, but of course it was the governor of the state of Kentucky that said, no, you're going to issue new gender-neutral forms. And so, again, you might want to pay attention to not only who your county clerk is, in the case so we're talking about Kim Davis, but who your governor is, who your state representatives are, and, of course, who your members of Congress are, and, of course, who your president is. So, James, thank you for that call. Let's work our way through most of the other calls today. We're going to relate to the shooting of these police officers, and if you would like to add the conversation or join it, 1-800-351-1212. We'll head out to California next. Robert, what would you like to add to the conversation today?
Hey, I like to applaud that pastor. I can't believe it. I was just getting chills just listening to him where he was elaborating on the deal with Iran, Iraq, and he's right. I never voted for President Obama, period. He's a Muslim. He doesn't love Christian people. He let all that mess go on in ISIS, and all the people that are Christians there get murdered, massacred, just like the situation that's going on with the cops killing blacks and Hispanics, and what Barack Obama is trying to do. It's all been perpetrated from the top, from the White House. First of all, they're trying to create so much civil unrest so that he can become, so he can implement the martial law. If you check your books there, and you'll see in Colorado they have concentration camps right underneath the airport there. I hope everybody's hearing this. And the FEMA, he's not. Our army is not going to fight against the civilians here. Meaning that the Army, the Navy, the National Guards, and so on and so on. They have their own group of military that will come in. They have already practiced here in California and other states just in case it's a civil unrest. And what better way to do it if you can get people, racial discrimination amongst the police and African American. We all need to unite and come together as one under the United States of America, where it was founded on the Word of God.
Well, let me just jump in real quickly that, I just don't think most Americans are going to go along with the idea of martial law, but gave you enough time. I want to give quite a number of other people a chance to join the conversation. And so, Kathy in Texas, you have the floor. What would you like to add?
Well, I wanted to, first of all, thank you for bringing up this topic. It's really important. And the number one thing I want to talk about is we need to remember that this isn't about race. This is that we were united. We're the United States. And when we go against authority and we have a problem with authority, these police officers have gone to schools, they've taken oaths to protect and serve and to walk the best way they know how professionally to protect us and be there for us. Then when we have people that have chosen to break a law, it doesn't matter about their color. It's they chose to break a law, to hurt someone out of choice. There's no comparison of apples to apples here. Yes, some people have made some mistakes as police officers. I don't know anyone that has been in the military that when they've been faced with a very serious conflict of violence or guns coming at them, that it's not a high-stress situation. They make the best decision they can. I know that anyone that has ever had to shoot or harm someone, that is the hardest thing that they've ever done. And to think that they take it lightly is an insult to them. But a lot of this needs to start from the beginning, where the parents are, where we are in our schools. And it's a breakdown of our education and following of rules and that problem with submission and submission to the truth. And the truth is what does set us free.
Sure. We should obey those in authority. And, if you're following the rules, a lot of these conflicts that we're talking about probably wouldn't have happened. And, of course, I was looking for a list because, okay, do you think the Michael Brown shooting was illegitimate? And we can go through the long list of individuals that have been, in many cases, misrepresented, or in some cases, there's a case that I'm looking at right now in the news where they shot an individual and thought he had a knife. Well, he did have a knife, but he didn't have it in his hand. Okay, well, sometimes hindsight is 20/20. There are times when we watch a football game or a baseball game and think the umpire got it wrong or the referee got it wrong. Then we see the replay and go, I guess they got it right. I misunderstood that.
But at the same,
go ahead.
Exactly, sir. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I apologize. At the same time, there's a big difference between an official with a game and someone in a high-stress situation, things going on around them, and someone coming at them with a knife.
Yes.
And maybe not being in their right mind at the time. It could be drugs, it could be alcohol, it could be anything. It could be, we're not walking in their shoes. And they are trained, they go to, basically, police officers of all genres go to boot camp to prepare. And they're not walking in ill-prepared. Do people make a mistake? Yes. Some people make mistakes driving and they hit somebody. But that doesn't make them, I did this on purpose because you're black. On the inside, everybody's DNA and everybody's still got all the same parts. And we were united, and it's a privilege. I look back when I taught history, and when I look at stuff from World War I and World War II, they weren't sitting there going, well, we're Italian Americans. They were excited about being American. And my heritage goes back to founding this country and literally signing the Declaration of Independence and naming West Point after my family. So, I mean, it's a united thing, and we've got to remember that, you know, we're all in this together, and we've got to show respect for our elders. We have to show respect for rules. We don't have to like them, but we do need to respect them. And if you do not have to solve things with violence. If you disagree with what police officers have done, then do so. The pen is mightier than the sword, and as we can see by all these unfortunate laws that are being laid down.
Thank you. We got to take a break, but I appreciate your call, Kathy, and we'll take some more phone calls right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Put a couple of issues on the table here. One of those, of course, the killing of 4 police officers in the last 9 days. Of course, the issue of the county clerk, Kim Davis, and we're going to hear from just a minute another individual that is giving us some perspective on somewhere else in Kentucky where this is playing out. And then, of course, my commentary today on the Iran deal and the fact that it looks like it will now go through because President Obama has been able to find at least 34 Democrats that are willing to go with that, and I'll try to explain some of that later as to why it's supposed to be a treaty, which means 2/3. That'd be 67 votes. But anyway, we have all sorts of people wanting to talk about all 1 or 2 or all 3 of those issues, so we'll take those on sequentially. Since I mentioned Kentucky, let me go back to Kentucky, WYGE. Arlie, I think you were going to give us an update on what is happening in your particular county.
Yeah, we in Whitley County, we have another judge executive, a Kay Schwartz, who is also not issuing license, and Casey Davis in Casey County, Kentucky, and then there is another one. But these clerks now, when they took oath and took office, the amendment wasn't ruled yet, and I don't think they should have to serve any jail time because the oath they took didn't include this.
No, it
didn't. How can they enforce this upon these clerks?
That is the question I have. I mean, I have some people saying, wait a minute, if you're in the position, you have to do it. And if you can't, then you leave because you are serving at the discretion of the citizenry. But this just came down arbitrarily, if you want to be so blunt about it. Only 5 justices on the Supreme Court all of a sudden made it legal. Kentucky didn't make it legal. There wasn't a long legislative battle over this. There wasn't a chance to vet whether this made sense or to even talk about what that might mean to the county clerks. These are individuals that have served there for a long, long time. And then to tell you that these individuals are going to have to either do it or else they have to leave, or in this case, one might serve time in jail. Really? I mean, there's something seriously wrong about the way this is playing out. If for no other reason, it's back to the philosophy that I think most Americans have. We're kind of a live and let live society. We say, okay, if you want to do that, I may not agree with you, but you're free to go do it. I'm not going to endorse it, but I'm not going to keep you from it. But the gay bullies, they're not live and let live. They're finding photographers and bakers and florists and innkeepers, and in this case, county clerks, and they're targeting them, saying you have to knuckle under, or if you do not, you're going to pay a heavy price. And I just think it's something that the American people say, wait a minute, this has just gone too far in the wrong direction. And that's why Kim Davis from the county clerk in Rowan County is on the front page of USA Today today.
Right now, and in the amendment, in the ruling that the Supreme Court justice made, there was a statement that the religious liberties, would be protected, but apparently they're not going to be protected. If she stands for her religious belief, how can there's no way they should be able to throw her in jail, or as I said, that when she took office and took the oath, that was not part of the oath, and she has done her job as well as these other county clerks, sure. But they're not targeted yet because, this case is waiting the outcome of this case. But, they're under the same pressure. In fact, one of them is on a crusade across Kentucky to make people aware of the religious amendment rights that could be taken away, depending on outcomes of this.
Well, I got a feeling we'll be talking about it again on Friday. Kelly Shackelford will be with us, and we always do some focus on religious liberty. And Arlie, thank you for giving us an update from some of the other counties there in Kentucky. Let's get back to some of the questions about the shooting of the police officers, and we'll go to Georgia on the Good News Network. Ann, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I was listening to the commentary about the lack of respect and the innocent police officers being killed. And the way I see it is, I was abused as a child by my grandfather. And that doesn't mean that I can go around now hating all grandfathers or killing grandfathers or detesting grandfathers because of what happened in my experience. But in God's word, he says, like one who seizes the dog by the ears is a passerby who meddles in the quarrel not his own. For people to take up a cause and want to see policemen killed because of something that happened that could have been justified or not justified just shows a total profiling now against our police officers who lay down their lives for us every day. And I also wanted to comment on the gay rights and all these things that are going on in our country. Lawlessness is starting at the top in America today. And I don't think anybody has any security. It's my hope that people will go to God, find God, to go to him
for our security and protection, because it's not coming from the government. It never will come from our government as it stands. But I recently resigned because I was asked to work, or I was told I had to work on Sunday, even though the terms of my hire was that I didn't have to work on Sunday. Christians are supposed to submit to all authority instituted among men unless it causes us to defile our conscience with God. He's our first authority. And it concerns me that Christians don't have rights anymore, but we couldn't go impose putting a Christian cross on a Muslim cake, or, we couldn't impose our beliefs, but neither can we live our beliefs anymore in this country. To me, it's just deteriorating so quickly.
I think so. Again, Kelly Shackelford will be with us on Friday, and one of the things we'll talk about here is that one of the requirements, and this is a federal law, is to make accommodation. In other words, if an individual says, let's take it out of the Christian realm, and let's say I'm an Orthodox Jew, and I just really can't from Friday sundown to Saturday sundown, I cannot work. This is something that is not allowed in my particular belief system. Then if indeed you can make an accommodation at that particular office or restaurant or whatever, you are to do so. And it seems to me that in some cases where you have one county clerk, that becomes difficult. But in most counties, well, you just get a different clerk to sign off on it. Or if it really hurts your feelings and you just simply say, I can't do this, I'll go to the next county and get it done. But that's, of course, seen as discriminatory. That's seen as flaunting it. A good example of that, of course, was Aaron and Melissa Klein, where they simply said, we just can't in good conscience bake a cake, and they're in Gresham, Oregon. So the lesbian couple goes down the street and they get a cake. But then they sue, and now they're fining and have fined Aaron and Melissa Klein $135,000 because they couldn't bake a cake for a lesbian couple. They'd already got the cake and got the celebration, and everything went just fine. So that, I think, illustrates how in many cases Christians are being targeted, and why I think you need to support some of these religious liberty groups. Well, we're out of time before we're out of calls. I apologize for any of you that had some more to say, but you know what? Tomorrow is another day, and we'll give you that opportunity to weigh in with some of your comments. And I might just mention that if you just joined us, that first hour interview that we did with Ken Wilgus on the book Feeding the Mouth That Bites You on Raising Adolescents, just a great book, and you can find out more about that on our website, pointofview.net. Some great resources there. If you didn't have a chance to hear it, you can download the podcast or watch the live cast. And if you would like to find some of the articles we've posted here on that book, as well as some of the things happening right now in the political realm, it's all available at the website pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew and Catherine and Chris for their help behind the scenes. Tomorrow we'll get back into some of the issues in the news. Also want to let you know about another Christian film that I think will be doing very well. And amazing how well War Room has been doing, number 2 in the box office. So Christian films are doing better. So we'll talk more about another Christian film you need to know about. That'll be tomorrow here on Point of View. We'll see you then.
At dinner recently, I was struck by the couple in front of me. They were allegedly spending a night out together, but the only time they communicated in a half hour was one time when the man showed what was on his phone to the woman, and then back to their own screens. We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You'll find us online with your phone, your tablet, your laptop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues. You can also follow our new YouTube video series, Uncensored. Stay informed. Follow us on Twitter at Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Again, at Point of View RTS. We'd love you to retweet us, to share our Facebook posts, but please don't do it when you're out with your family or someone you love. We can wait. We're online 24 hours a day. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.